Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very important episode. An episode which is, I would say, one of the most important sentences that a religious person can hear. Where do we begin? In the history of human beings, it has been the game of an emergence of creaturehood. Then, after the objective mobility stabilized, I feel it became a game of subjective significance. So it was as if attention was first only on objects, and it noticed that they can watch the object in a different way. That's what subjectivity means. That's what language is. It's another way the realm is translated, and we're identifying with it. In my childhood, of course, I was born in Iran, and at the age of 6 or something, I came to Canada. And I was here for some years, then I went back, and that was really for like 3 years when I was in Iran. Middle school, pretty much. I can tell you I saw the significance of ideology in the behind the scenes of people's life. When I was young, I was afraid of the dark. I'm going to share something with you honestly about my life. When I was young, I was afraid of the dark, and I remember it was because of this movie me and my brother had seen about the alien movie. It was called Signs or something, like we were young kids. And I remember I go to, my mother was very religious at the time. I went to her and I asked her, what do I do? I'm afraid of the dark. And she said, say God's name. She told me, imagine a little kid. She told me, say God's name 7 times, then go to sleep, you know? And so I remember in my childhood, I had this thing where I would go to bed, and every time I was scared of the dark, I would say this name, uh, and I would feel as if at peace, but it was more like I needed to do something to come to terms with the moment. And so that habit of saying mantras, saying chants, I later on realized that was zikr in the Sufi tradition, you know. So I remember closing my eyes, and my mother had said 7 times, so I would repeat this, saying, God is merciful, God is forgiving, like 7 times as a kid. Then I would just like fall asleep, you know. But there was a point to it, though. There was a significance. I want to say that there was, in that moment, you see, in life, we are born solo. Then there's others. Then there's very big gaps, missing links, missing pieces to the puzzle of the realm. I can say that the idea of God was, in some sense, a notion of uh, it was just an owner to the universe. If the universe has an owner and we are the guest here, it is not our responsibility, you know? Many things that was beyond the human free will, the human being couldn't do anything. They needed a narrative to suffice, something to say, something to know, you know? we are creatures that evolved from stillness, from silence. There was a huge amount of silence in the cosmos. Not in the cosmos, but on Earth, and then we emerged. And then based on what we saw, we created our knowledge. This is why the unknown is way more fascinating to me, because it is that which is not made. It's just there. What we consider knowledge is a unique relationship. It's a unique identification. So the reason I shared with you why I would say those things was that I was actually born in a context where the idea of God was watching, believe it or not. You know, the idea of God was as early as I can remember. Like, it was just part of the politics of the country. And it's not that the idea of God is wrong or right. It's really human beings that what they do is right or wrong. If the human being creates a concept of nothing, or you can say the consciousness to empty space was the emergence of God. That means we can't ignore the fact that all human beings, they are awakening to information. It's as if like there's a river of moving information, and we're a part of that river suddenly that's become conscious. Any ideology that is not, that surpasses the individual. You see, when you think of a very, somebody said this, it was hilarious, on a long enough time span, everything, the chances of extinction and the breaking, nothing withstands a long enough time span. If you're someone listening, because I'll be honest, the talks that I give, they can be scolded from, they can be scolded from the secular side, and they can be scolded from the non-secular side. When a man speaks about any sort of metaphysics, the religious angle gets angry. Why? Because the soul is the secret of God. Who the hell are you who knows anything? And when we go from the secular perspective, the imagination is denied. Do you see? That means it's as if when we think about ourselves, nobody comes up to like another person and say, prove to me you exist. The idea of you exists, this thought, your name. Do you know what I mean? It's like there's a certain subjective component to the human being that our intelligences just consider. When we look at a person, we suddenly know their name, but they are not their name. It's just mouth noises. Ludwig Wittgenstein really dived into this, where he was wondering about the human mind, and he was wondering about what's going on, and he noticed that it's kind of like building things before it does things. Ludwig Wittgenstein says the limits of my language are the limits of my world. Hopefully today I'll get a chance to dive into Kant's quotes, a quote tunnel of Kant and Wittgenstein. So if language is the limits of your world, if the language changes, the limits of your world has changed. And you can say that human life, there is an experiential language, there is a language that has nothing to do with what you know from before or anything. It's just your alertness. It's just how your attention is in the room. You see, like sometimes when I sit to give these talks, it's not that there is like a script prepared from before. For me, I start speaking about things, and when I speak about things, they project in my inner realms. Then I observe them in the inner realms and comment, and suddenly, you know, honestly, people should see my artwork. I think that's how I talk. Pretty much, I'm saying that in my childhood, the notion of religion, the notion that there was a God, it gave comfort to the abstract self-positioning of the human being. That means, imagine you like, it's just like this, you know. I found myself in I mean, I think it's too soon to share this, but you know, the poet Rumi says silence is the language of God, all else is poor translation. That means, honestly, without language, how would we be able to access any story? Before anybody can even read Revelation, they have to learn to read. It's as if language was required before something could be communicated through it, you know? That's the fascinating thing. Like, as I'm sitting here speaking to you, I notice, like, in my moment, there's the objective component. My body's just sitting on a chair. I'm looking at a tree in front of me, you know? But in my inner realms is not sitting on a chair. My inner realms is not sitting. My inner realms is the whole moment. Like right now, I'm looking at this tree's branches, and in my inner realms, I could see geometry instead of the branches. I could see geometry branching out of something. You know, some things in life, a person can read as much as they want about it, but unless they experience it, it doesn't settle in. You know, I think of it this way, like, in personally being raised, like, with sort of religious waves of information in my upbringing, I can tell you, yeah, there's been dangerous situations where suddenly, I remember in my youth, even there was a time when I was in Iran, but I would start praying, you know? And that prayer was as if when I felt the individual, when I felt my free will came short, it was as if I would look to the world, you know? Freud speaks about something very crucial. He says, I mean, to a certain level crucial. I mean, Freud had many errors too, I find, but Freud said something that it's like, it's these famous words where people know Friedrich Nietzsche said God is dead, and then Freud said God is dad. And he meant that it's like this: when the person can't live, they want a higher power. Do you know, when the son is stopped, the father comes in. You know, and then I remember, after noticing this from Carl Jung, I noticed Jordan Peterson speaking about Christ as if that was the archetype, as if what else could Christ have called it? You see, in order to communicate, we need to take from the world. The moment we take from the world, we identify. You know, you cannot be someone in power. You see, no person can have a slave without being a slave. Your attention is locked, you know? Human beings don't realize, if there's more to this landscape, if there's 0.00, what amount of zeros you want, 1% chance that this is a multidimensional reality and our perceptions are not accurate, then what we require to do is a totally different approach. That means, in a known battlefield, the general can look at it and in some sense make a decision. He's seeing the different variables. But when the unknown variables in the moment increase more than the known variables, the idea of self, you can say, fades. I was talking to someone earlier today. This analogy came to my mind where I thought it was heavenly, this analogy, and I'll tell you, it was the analogy of how, like, there's a puddle of muddy water, this notion of impurity, and then this notion that the water evaporates, and when the water evaporates, it does not take the purity with it. Sometimes I thought people had to acknowledge there being other worlds, because if this world was just based on what we see, many factors cannot even be kept because it's changing. That means it's like, what do you believe? What's truth in a changing world? Whatever it is, it seems to be changing. Whatever language I put, every day I come to talk about what is going on in my moment of experience of this existence, and you know what happens? The existence is just going with the mind of the planet. The experience is watching that mind and can make an additional decision. Zen Master Dogen says to study, he says, like he's saying a path to enlightenment, he's saying study the self. You who want the ultimate, study the self. But to study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to awaken to the nature of all things. The only way I would consider that all ideological systems could potentially be saying the same thing is because the nature of truth has a sort of locality. It's like a higher dimensional location. It doesn't have a form, but we know it's there, For me, anything a person doesn't understand, they fear. Very simple. Very simple. Anything you stop trying to figure out, you will fear. This is the secret. So whenever fear comes, just sigh and march in, pretty much. That's the approach, I'll be honest, guys, this title, You Can Always Be With God, the title arose yesterday, and really it arose to an experience where I noticed if the person considered an intelligence as a field underlying everything, like a substratum of manifestation, then it would be a sort of situation where even if the person isn't in harmony with universal intelligence, it's as if, here's the thing, it's like in... Oh my God, excuse me. What can I say? We are fragments of a world, wondering what the truth of all of it is. The only possibility is if we're mirrors. I believe this was in either the poetry of Rumi or Hafiz, one of these guys, where it was as if truth was a shattered mirror, and every piece saw the whole truth, yet it wasn't the whole truth. You see? It's as if drops on your windshield merging, and you're like, oh my God, is that humanity? You know, is that what humanity's future? Drops merging, individuals realizing that now they can experience a collective experience? There is a silence that will teach louder than words. And then there is a voice that will teach louder than silence. You see, there's voices. Man has access to interpretation. Really, our skill, if honestly we thought, like, let's say an advanced extraterrestrial species invaded planet Earth, and we were thinking about, like, what are our most advanced technologies? We'd see we only have language and art. Like, we got to find some way through our evolutionary advancement of art and language. And even though there's psychology, but here's the thing. Nature sometimes doesn't have constraints. That means you enter a system and you don't know where its end is, but you can make an expectation and assumption. You know, it's kind of like there's nothing wrong with rationality, but if there's endless unknown variables, the rationality is as good as any guess. Not in regards to a visible landscape. I'm saying that if we as human beings were curious to wonder about our sensory perception beyond the electromagnetic spectrum of sight. You know, right now it's very cool. You know, I didn't realize this when I was younger, but it's like at some point in my life, I'm like, wait a minute, am I an engine that's generating life? And I realize, yeah, it's as if we may think we're just a simple person, but there's so much complexity occurring inside the body of the person. You know. After you study the self, one can say, you forget the self. Then Dogen, just to finish off that quote, says, to forget the self is to awaken to the nature of all things. Now, to explain that would mean that how can you awaken to the nature of all things if you're an individual body? Only if there is something to the nature prior to the body that is there. You know, it's kind of like the same error the educational system is making, history is also making. The educational system has so many children enter the educational system and they complete assignments, but none of those assignments go anywhere. I'm pretty sure the teacher throws out the assignments after the teacher's done reading them. Or maybe they archive it, which is pointless, just wasting space. But I'm saying, like, the point is, imagine that children got paid. You would have no children, as if the child, you know, so many kids. I was shocked by this, especially in Canada. We see this. It's as if, like, now, of course, there has been societal reform, but there was a lot of people during my high school who were selling illegal stuff. Do you know? And I wondered, why are these people doing it? Because they had realized it's as if man has desire. That's what the educational system doesn't realize. Because man has desire, he does not have order. And if man doesn't have order, he forgets who he is and he descends to animalhood. That means if you do probably 10 things wrong in a row, your nature is going to descend. If God is a concept, then it's man-made. If the notion of God is an event, then it's not man-made. That means we could totally fathom that it's intelligent. Right now, we're considering our intelligence is just from this planet. Of course, when you have a material analysis on the realm, there's specific conditions. You cannot ignore, like, background radiation, you know? You can totally see as if the cosmos through temperature was actually crafted. You know, I find it very fascinating. In religion, they say that it was as if man is made of clay, as if God made man from clay and then imbued it life with its breath. And so when we see the cosmos, it's as if this clay that has been in a furnace. Now the mystery is, where did its content arise? The novelty, the uniqueness. I mean, look at us as creatures. We're symmetrical beings. and there's some strange things going on, like we have two eyes but one heart. We have two lungs, but for example, one stomach. It's like reality is very strange. It's as if I feel the human body was not the. Here's the thing. I mean, I feel two dimensions are building life in every moment. We just don't realize it, and we're trying to live in a singular way, then wondering, oh my God, what's going on? If any person, I feel this system's going to work, this model I'm proposing, that you add an axis of known and the unknown. That means instead of thinking that the person knows something or doesn't know something, forget the IQ test, the guy who came up with it had a very low IQ. I'm not joking, because that person thought it can be measured. Intelligence is a response. That's it. It's not a certain response. It can't be a certain measurement. That means intelligence is who sees the world as it is. That's intelligence. What other intelligence can there be? If everybody opens their eyes, it's just the realm. There is games. There is psychological games that could be played. For example, in the Sufi tradition, they saw 4 phases towards this notion of a godhood where actually the individual archetype had dissolved into knowing that it was the love of the beyond. The Sufi path, they call it the Sufi path of love. Why? Because these people realize that it is void. That in this universe you can do whatever, play any role, act in many ways, even direct, but you're going to see after some point that the point of it being life, it's that it's alive beyond you. That means it's like death is a sign that you're not God. Do you know? And I'm just sharing this idea that, I mean, of course, this whole episode is focused on a theological perspective, so whoever's listening, just keep in mind I'm intentionally moving towards the theological. I feel that if you fight something, you may not see what you're fighting. But if you first enter the room before intent, the intent arises. I can't tell you how much of my life is like receiving signals. Like our minds are antennas. I am so convinced. And the inner life of the species is for the first time getting closer and closer to collectively emerging. So my point is that it doesn't matter what shape you see. You can see endless shapes. Endless. You can even close your eyes and see endless shapes. When I have to wait for long periods of time, I do 2 things. Either I keep my eyes open, like for example at a busy line or somewhere, or sitting at the doctor's office or something, It's like whenever there's a moment of waiting, I have 2 approaches. Either I open my eyes and I just see how long I can watch the moment without any opinion. Do you know? And then the other approach is I close my eyes and I walk in my inner realms. The healthiest thing we can do is, rather than building a society that wants a good view and a bad view, we update morality towards efficiency and inefficiency. And efficiency, we can see 4 stages. I'll get to the Sufi hierarchies, guys, but just to say this, it's like, imagine a modern morality where efficiency is like, is it a win-win or is it a win-lose? So it's like 3 levels, you can even say. There is, you lose and your world loses. The self loses and the world loses. You can say there's a version where the self loses, the world wins. There's a version where the self wins and the world loses. Then there's a version where the world wins and the self wins. That means I was surprised why nobody in history had found a way to harmonize both. It's as if they had to leave the city to get insights of what the city actually was. You know, the shaman was the outsider, the hidden eyes of the tribe. There is something about your eyes that when you realize you don't know, it starts. True metaphysics starts when you realize you don't know, not when your spirituality has nothing to do with what you know. It has to do with how much you actually have noticed the unknown underneath everything, and what levels of contentment have avalanched into your experience of how your attention is wielded by you. You know, you can say, just like how people wear clothing, we're multidimensional beings, and the mind wears language. So I have to call myself, for example, Mr. Within, or my real name is Amin, as to be an individual, you know? But it's like wondering, how can you speak to someone without names, without words? It would be a silent language of just watching the same thing. That means right now we have language and words and we can celebrate. Yeah! Like imagine a soccer World Cup soccer game, someone scores, everybody cheers. Everybody's inner realms reveals to everybody what's going on in their inner realms. You know? But there's so many people on this planet that I will tell you, there's two ways to walk. If you have too many rejections, so that, when I say rejection, I mean, like, don't get me wrong, this world is a lovely place, but it has a shadow. And the shadow is how there are parts of society that are not evolved yet. There are probably human beings all over the planet which are being still treated like animals. That should be the first thing. Do you know, like, the advanced civilization I envisioned, I've wrote about it a little bit in my science fiction novels, is a civilization that defends art and sees human beings are art. Do you know, like in my science fiction novel set in the year 5025, their government is called the Enlightened Society. And it's the first government on the planet. Two new things about this government. This is in the year 5025. Keep that in mind, whoever's listening. The Enlightened Society, one point of it is it's a multidimensional government. There's 9 parallel realities. Sorry, guys. Just hang on. My attention just went to something outside of the talk. Okay, so all right, what was I saying? Yeah, so the Enlightened Society is a government that is conducting multiple parallel dimensions of Earth. It is the government that was established when the first artist became a politician, and this artist decided to, instead of putting the military budget on the instead of putting the budget of the wealth of the country towards the military, this person just decided, this leader decided in the sci-fi novel, decides to build the most artistic nation, and suddenly something strange happens where other artists, people see how beautiful nations have become, and suddenly countries are not competing over which has more nuclear weapons. They're competing over which is more beautiful. There is something in this world that when it becomes collectively noticed, it will lead to a renaissance. That there is a beauty which has nothing to do with what you are or what you have done. It is just how you enter your next moment. There are some people who get on a roller coaster and it's hilarious. They wait in the line for hours, they get on the roller coaster. When they get on the roller coaster, they get scared and they close their eyes. So they're on the roller coaster, but they don't get to see it. They go through the experience, but their eyes are not open. And so now the species has to open in the eyes of its mind. That language is commonality. Language is agreement. And above all, language is a dream. That's why I call it the linguistic simulation. People don't realize this. That there are events going on this planet that cannot be put to words. And if you only seek words, then the philosopher has never seen the horizon. It is easy to glorify the past. It is easy to glorify the future. But the present is the gift that only free will can open. And it's this intense thing, it's weird. In certain intense moments of my life when I was younger, now there is no language. Now, ever since 2011, something strange happened in my experience where language no longer was the defining factor of my life. Like silence had become as okay as language to me. Fear is its own lesson, of course. Whatever you do on this planet, you're creating memories for your future self. Literally, the present is where you design how you remember yourself in the future. Constantine says people talk too much. Don't put everything into words. Yeah, man. Yeah, that is true. There's actually nothing wrong with speech. It's just that if you think the language is superior to the experience, you miss out on the experience. That's really the case. I'll tell you this story. It has a religious context. The story is about this woman who she is praying every day, very in a devout, faithful way. She's never done anything wrong, and every night she prays and she says, "God, come and see me, please." It's this widow. Imagine a widow, this lone woman. And she says, "God, please come and see me, please come and see me, please." Her prayer is just, "Come and see me, God." And what happens is she gets a dream that night that a voice says, "I will come and meet you tomorrow," as if God has spoken to her. She wakes up. She's like, "No way, God's coming to my house." She starts cleaning everything. She's cleaning everything, tidying everything. Suddenly there's a knock on a door. And it's like this very poor beggar boy who says, "I'm hungry," or something, and the lady says, "Get out of here, God's about to come. I can't have a beggar. God is the most high, the most royal. Get out of here, beggar kid," and she pushes the beggar kid. She doesn't push the kid. I mean, that's too far, but she tells the kid to get out of here, and the kid this hungry kid goes on this hungry life, Suddenly something happens as she's cleaning, as the hours of the day are going by. Suddenly the door knocks, and it's as if it's someone who needs a phone or something, maybe not a phone, maybe the story's more archaic than that, but anyways, the person says, "Do you have, I don't know, a messenger pigeon?" I don't She says, "No, get out of here, God is coming to my house." Like, "Who are you? Get out of here," and the guy leaves. And one more thing happens. One other person comes, her neighbor comes and asks for sugar, and she's like, "Get out of here." And so whatever happens, and she just keeps the house clean and she's waiting. And it passes. The day passes, it becomes night, and she just gives up and she goes to bed, and she prays and all that, but she goes to bed and she's like, God didn't come. What is this? And in her dream, she finds herself where the voice was. And she suddenly notices she's in an audience with the divine. And she says, God, I cleaned my house. Why didn't you come? Whole day I was waiting for you. Why? And the voice, like lightning, says, I came 3 times. You did not see me. You did not see me because you wanted to see me. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing, honestly, like in nightclubs, where it's as if people desire one another without actually knowing what they're desiring. If you can notice the ground, then all that is left is flight. You don't fear the unknown. If you have a certain contentment with what's going on in the objective realm. It's like when you know how the engine of a car works, then when you drive a car, you feel comfortable. You just feel like you know what's going on. And honestly, I would say that's an urge. I think it's not just survival of the fittest. That survival of the fittest simultaneously has a sub-urge of surviving to see more from the event. Because I think about it, I remember hearing Christopher Hitchens, this atheist, say to this theist person they were debating, and Christopher Hitchens made an interesting point, and he said that you could have been born anywhere on the planet. And you could have had any kind of color set of thought. Christopher Hitchens didn't use that sentence, but he was saying that you could be born anywhere. Like if you were born back in the day, you'd believe in Zeus, and if you were in ancient Greece. So he was saying that religion is also, because we're beings that identify with more than ourselves, has to do with epigenetics, things that are influences on the system beyond the genetics. So really, when they say God is a man-made idea, that means man is a man-made idea. So who is man before he made the idea of man? Do you see, it is as mysterious as the inconceivability of all language and attention. Because I feel this, when I look at the early settlers, I see in many historic contexts, you see like the early people, they just didn't know any better. They have an innocence. Like if I time traveled, if there was a time travel, let's say you could go to the grocery store and buy time travel, I don't know, keychain, and you press a button on that keychain, and let's say you time traveled back. You know how I would feel if I saw my ancestors? I would be completely compassionate to them. Even if they were animals, because they are like children. They have the innocence of not knowing. And when you actually accept your nature and you live, that innocence is what poetically, from Vedic standpoint, the lords of karma are like, all right, this person has noticed. This person has noticed the world is moving before them, so now the attention is going to them. They get their karma. Do you know how many people don't get their own karma? That's a blessing too. There's a blessing to get out of karma, but I would say there's also a blessing of the kind of karma you have, which kind of winds of evolution, which radio frequency you found yourself in, Because I think about it the same way Christopher Hitchens was saying you could be born. I thought I could be born on any other planet, so how would I treat aliens? Why would I call them aliens? I could totally see that we could have been born on like the moons of Jupiter instead of here, and wondered if there was something such as Earth. Imagine right now the whole species was born on a moon of Jupiter, and we notice there's a planet called Earth that nobody's been on. How fascinating would it be? It's as if we would see our heaven, but we wouldn't be able to go in it yet. So Charles says, is surviving enough without thriving to look forward to Mr. Within? Here's the thing, Charles. Do you want a mystical answer, or do you want just a grounded, very material-oriented answer to that? Because let me tell you, there is no such thing as the concept surviving doesn't exist. You're an existential energy. You're an existential energy. You're just existing. You see, you're the experience, the dimension, the mind, where the experiencer is found and is identifying with. That's what's changing. So technically, the body is immortal. It's just that when we sleep, it's not in our domain of experience, but we're being it. I don't know how many people have tried this, but I found myself in a dream that I could consciously move in, and I held my nose and I could still hear myself breathing, and it was complete certainty I was in a dream state. Yeah, Charles, my take is really that there is some 50% of life, sure. Go put it under the magnifying glass. But the other 50% it's not an analysis, it is participation with an event that is happening once in every moment. That participation with that event is the notion that either you are in the center, either you're in the center, or you notice the center, you know? So when I say you can always be with God, here's the thing. The notion of God was so metaphysical that it was as if even if the person didn't believe, that means there's so many people in religious communities looking at who they are considering to be disbelievers, do you know? And they are, in some sense, how can I tell you? It's as if they're like, look at these poor souls. They don't see God is in the room, you know? That's the religious kind of arrogance. So there's a secular arrogance. It's like, get out of here with this masquerade. And then from the religious standpoint, it's as if like, hey, man, you don't see what's in the room, you know? What is a human being? A dimension of being, and based on what's being, things are being done. So you can say any action you have done, any moment of experience is existing, as long as there's a body. Do you know? As long as there's something to identify with. Like I'm thinking right now, what if we were just disembodied individuals? Like literally when you think about the psychology of a ghost, you're like, look at this poor moment of life where it's as if it sees everything but doesn't see itself, you know? So you can say the self and the world are like your sword and shield. The world is your shield, the self is the sword. The self is the free will, the mover. So I'm telling you this notion, before language, who were we? And we are a silent event. If we do not have the honor to consider this unknown silent event, I will tell you, you can get ideologically possessed. I've seen so much ideological possession, it's scary. What that means is I speak, but my whole notion is I'm that person in history saying, guys, there's more than the language, so be playful with the language. You see, you can say the person who's never experienced power, that's why they want power, just to see what it's like. But the person who's experienced power like 10,000 times, that person doesn't want power anymore. That person has realized that the world has a mind. So you can say that we are here I mean, I see it as four phases of evolution. This is based on, you can say this is Mr. Within's model on evolution, where I see there was an unconscious world, an unconscious self, the objective evolution, creaturehood, the body emerged, and then there was a subjective evolution where they don't teach and nobody's talking about, and that's why I created the term inner realms. First it was the subjective realms, then I saw that it had the same design and symmetry if I use the word inner. So after the unconscious self, the subjective evolution is the conscious self. Now we're going to the conscious world. Do you see? Now it's like we've experienced caterpillarhood, which was individualism. Now we want to metamorphosize to go into butterflyhood. But what it really that kind of transform metamorphosis uh, of the mind of the person would imply, it would imply that right now, technically, even though we are considering the brain is like a candle, consciousness is like candlelight, and the body is like the biological candle wax, but it's as if like the light is not wax. So it could be that if we try to understand candlelight based on wax, it's impossible. And I think that's where the hard problem of consciousness has led us. That now the language needs to evolve before the person can. Before the person knew the presence was there, you know? Charles, the butterfly is collective. Yeah, that's my whole thing. In the future, we're not individuals. We will be like, no way, we were a field of energy the whole time? Who knew? For billions and billions of years, who knew? We were the whole show. We thought we were actors. We thought we were just the character in the video game. Little did we know the character in the video game setting, like the map the video game character finds itself, they're the same. And mysticism is remembering who is playing behind the screen of a world that had to be written first. You see, do not fear the unknown. That is God. And when I say do not fear the unknown, the ego has fear. Whether you like it or not, you can't deny that. The ego has fear. It's just that when the person notices something more important, concentration is navigation. I am telling you right now, it's not, we don't see it, but there's going to come a time where what we think is daydreaming, like students daydreaming in the classroom, that's going to become way more vivid. What that means is it's not just an archaic revival of the outer realms. It's also an archaic revival of internal events. What does that mean? That means, really, we have lived as people. We saw what that was like. Now we're just like, all right, let's see what's going on before. Do you see where that leads us? It brings us to a common human language. That before we could speak, we're all existing. What greater alphabet could there be? That means imagine right now the species right now. Imagine there was an extraterrestrial invasion. Okay? An advanced extraterrestrial civilization was invading. Imagine. Do you think our planet is ready? Do you think our planet has the organization? The only piece, the fastest detour to an efficient collective humanity is to realize that it's not through love. Love is the slow way. You know? I mean, if you can access love, you go that crossroad. If you can love the world into advancement, do it. Imagine children walking on the street, just on the street, and their inner realms has a geometrical spontaneous synchronization with everywhere they go. For example, this happens where I saw it in a film that there was this advanced technology that was scanning geometrically. That means it was scanning with a line. Do you know what I mean? So what I mean by that is that, like, sometimes when I drive, I notice, of course, my attention is on the road and further ahead on the roads, like a Tetris game, so you know what's coming when you drive, right? So as as I was driving in the highway, as I was looking at the road, my mind, my inner realms started spontaneously started to see lines of light, just lines, geometrical lines between my car and every car. It was for a second as if my mind, as if you imagine all the cars in the highway were dots on a blank page, suddenly my mind was connecting those dots. It was calculating, it was adding a dimension of geometrical movement simultaneously as I was an individual in an objective moment. See, it's not love that's the detour, Charles. I would say to you in the chat section. The solution is you realize the enemy of my enemy is my friend, so insta love. It's an instant love. It's a conditional love. That means people stop fighting because an alien species is, for example, attacking the planet. At that point, we wouldn't fight. All militaries would be used as defense bunkers. Probably we'd be pushed into a sort of medieval age nationhood if we disagree. But if humans work together, if the United Nations becomes where all the greatest strategists from all around the world, like that's the first thing that would happen. If there was an alien invasion and these aliens were multidimensional, for example, the first thing would be is to get the greatest minds all over the planet in one room. Then you draw up battle plans. And the thing is, it's like, here's the thing. It's not just expression. Those people who think power is just expressing, being intense or something, they haven't realized. There is no such thing as power. There is rhythm. Because lifetime is going forward and the nature of the realm is changing, it's as if the same way where Sun Tzu, this general who wrote The Art of War, he said, the general wins that sees the balance between heaven and earth. The general that sees heaven wins. That means life is not about brute force just expressed to get you through a situation. It's meant about you have a very sophisticated tool, which you're being. If the moment you get a collective mindset, you never had enemies. The moment you realize we're just fragile creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere, you'll be like, okay, wow, what has been my enemy? Everybody is suffering. Everybody is experiencing transformation in this realm. That means the New Age community doesn't even need to make a big deal about it. Yeah, there's transformation where the form is actually through a multidimensional witness being a new re-identification, because I can use any language. This talk that I'm giving to you in English, I could just give it in a different language, in Farsi right now. وقت کمه تو این زندگی. Time is short in this world. That means before you can look at your watch, the game is finished. God is the notion of the inconceivable. It was something unique happened that when man saw a personality to the whole cosmic activity, he also saw the unknown. That means, think of it this way. A person saw that they came from people, they looked at the sky and they're like, could the sky have come from a person? You could totally see eventually human beings would have reached that idea. So even if there was no divine revelation, I would honestly tell you some human being would suddenly give this whole thing a name, you know? So it would eventually happen. Voltaire was so wise during his time, he understood this, that he said even if there was no concept of God, it would be necessary to create it. Because what God is an angle. And there's no point of angles fighting when they are angles of the same point. You see, there's moments where you have to forgive your enemies, and there is moments where you have to forgive the enemy you have been to the natural world. Because even if someone hits you, that is the case that you, of course, self-defense is necessity. You know, don't forget to be a martial artist. But I'm saying that if there are other ways that life can move, then the stories we have told ourselves have been hollow. Voltaire says it would be necessary to create God. Why? Because we need it as an archive. We need it as a point in the spectrum. Every event in history, I was like, wow, how hilarious. Just like I remember different colors, just like there's the color spectrum, I'm like, okay, here, this is event spectrum. That's history for you. It's like a straight line where different parts of the line, it's colored different. Different phenomena happen. And what's even more kind of like, I remember I laughed at the same time, was a bit spooked by it when I noticed that the word history is literally like his story. It's just there's one S missing in the word. So whoever came up with the word history was a genius because they took out that extra S. They saw the one S, that his and the story are the same. That's the value of being a modern human being, where you are not bothered by the objective realm. Not that their suffering is less, like you gotta, every person, like sometimes in life, you want the unknown to move. I'm telling you, it becomes very boring to be in full control of life, it's like the same thing that even in sexual relationships where the person gets bored, you know? There's a constant shift. Like sometimes when I look at my inner the landscape of the ideological landscapes evoked in my inner realms, I notice that they are counter-cultural shifts to my childhood. It's as if in my childhood I was this, then I jumped to the other side. Then I was that, then I jumped to a different angle. So my point with sharing that the enemy of my enemy is my friend is that to say the enemy of all human beings is technically, it's not an enemy, but the challenge is the unknown and its time. So all that human beings are, it's like you've been given a certain time to explore. You can share with the tribe or you can solo it out. Most people are soloing it out. Their inner realms are like, at most, maybe the guy writes a book or maybe writes a story where fragments of his psyche are there. We haven't had the courage yet to roar our lives on the page yet. You know, I had this vision that in the future there will be this great library, the archive, the library of every human being, and suddenly you go see the shelves of this library is all the stuff that human being communicated. This will probably happen when AI really sets in, probably after the year 2050, maybe in 2067. Let's just throw a number out there. Here's the thing. If the person needs God, that means God's creation is imperfect. That means God didn't know what he's doing, and he has to correct the thing, you know? I want to read quotes for you guys from a man who probably no one has ever heard. But his name is Said Nursi. I was going to go into a tunnel for Wittgenstein and that, but I guess I'll make a part 2 to this or something. Or we'll call this You Can Always Be With God 1. Volume 1. So anyways, guys, I need to relocate. I'll be back. Okay. Okay. So, sorry everybody, I had to relocate. Now we're back. And if people are wondering if I live beside a NASCAR track, it sounds like it. So anyways, the whole notion of you can always be with God, before I dive into this Said Nursi quote tunnel, which I wanted to, in polytheism, everything is God's. In monotheism, everything is God's. God with the comma S. So it's as if the person is either God or the person is with God in that notion. So Said Nursi was, I believe, a Turkish mystic like Khalil Gibran and Rumi. Said Nursi, also spelled Said-i Nursi, Said-i Kurdi, and commonly known as the honorific Bediüzzaman, meaning wonder of the age, or simply Ustad, was a Kurdish, sorry, not Turkish, was a Kurdish Sunni Muslim theologian. He wrote the Risale-Nur collection, a body of Quranic commentary exceeding 6,000 pages. When was this? He was born 1876, 1960. His nationality was Turkish. There we go. I was right. I know what I'm talking about. So he has some quotes which are very key. That means he's kind of like responding to certain revelatory passages as if he's giving commentary on it. So Said Nursi, let's go into the quote tunnel. Let me put a picture of the guy so people know what I'm talking about. There we go. Here's the picture. This guy is Said Nursi. If people check the wallpaper of the talk. So the quote tunnel, let's go through it. There's 11 quotes here. Said Nursi says, if you want an enemy, the ego is sufficient. If you want advice, death is sufficient. Side Norsey says, worry is itself an illness, since worry is an accusation against divine wisdom, a criticism of divine mercy. That means it's like when the religious person worries, you know, it's kind of like, it's as if like then you forgot God, yeah? You know? It's like when man doesn't know what to do, you know, it's as if from a religious monotheistic standpoint, it's as if God at least knows what God is doing, you know? God knows what God is doing. Said Nursi says, I am not free and independent. I am a traveler with duties, you know, with tasks. Said Nursi says, the truth cannot be deceptive and one who sees it cannot be deceived. Said Nursi says, the mirror to the beautiful is beautiful. That's an epic sentence. The mirror to the beautiful is beautiful. That means it's like a radio frequency beauty. Right. Said Nursi says, the heart does not derive pure pleasure from what is impermanent. Said Nursi says, he causes huge bodies like sun to proclaim his majesty. Through his names the all-gracious, great reciting, O glorious one, O great one, O mighty one. While tiny animate creatures like flies and fish proclaim his mercy, reciting, O gracious one, O compassionate one, O generous one. That means he's saying the whole cosmos is aware that the cosmos is intelligent. You know, pretty much as if like our universe is like an organ in a cosmic body, you know. Other organs, there's other dimensions, you know. There's a linearized multidimensionality which is as man-made as the idea of God. That means technically the idea of man is also man-made. So if they say something man-made doesn't exist, then in some sense we don't exist, you know. It's like the atheist that denied God, then concluded free will was an illusion, and then wondered who had denied God. Do you know what I mean? So it's like it's language games. It's honestly language games. And if we can evolve beyond the language, we'll see the actual world that is here. Not a world of fear of being in the shade too long. I mean, really. Said Nursi says, life is a manifestation of unity. And that's a good point. I mean, there's one view where we see it's not. It's separate things, cells becoming bigger, more complex cells. And we could totally see it's like complex cells, which are becoming even more complex. Like, do you know what I mean? It's like, or we can see it as if there's a perfection where we have, we are the imperfect effect of, you know? I don't know, it's very hard to see a shape to unity. Said Nursi says, do what you do only for God's sakes. For God's sake. Start for God's sake, work for God's sake, and act within the sphere of God's good approval. So technically think about the statement. What is it? What is its theological value to reality? God is an inconceivable notion. Anything that we say is man-made has a beginning, middle, end to some degree. That's how we're considering like phenomena in this realm. So if God was something that wasn't created or destroyed, it was the thing that created though, you know what it feels like? It feels like somebody threw a rock in a pond and a universe began. Waved into manifestation. You know, it feels like as if the thing, the input wasn't from the realm where the output was displayed. It's as if like there's this notion, you see, I remember seeing this incredible picture where just like how kids play with remote control cars, which I did when I was young, these kids were playing with giant robots in like a farm field or something. So they were sitting in the corner with two remotes, and two giant robots were just like battling it out. You know, as if that was like the future remote control car. It's a giant robot instead. So the whole notion of remote means a sort of teleportation, as if the person put their head out of water, then in water, then went to another part of the pool, and then brought their head out of water. You know? The inner realms is a challenge. You know, it's a new idea, because I feel every philosopher in history paved the way. Now we just need people to go on the way. You know? There's nothing more powerful than a new moment. Nothing more powerful than realizing the unknown is breathing too. You know what that means? That means realizing civilization is built on a giant turtle's back, and it's as if some person in that civilization found a way to just put their palm on the neck of that turtle where all civilization was built on, and for a second not get any sort of instruction or idea, just realize that there is something alive regardless of what we see. That is the inconceivable secret. That even if we may not be here tomorrow, we were here today. Existence, that imprint is made in the universal memory, the cosmos, because it can never forget what it emerges. You know, it may not be conscious of it. You know, sometimes I feel there's no such thing as death. It's like the conscious spotlight is moved somewhere else. That means it's as if like it's a moment where I kind of imagine at the end of this life it would be where the mind salutes the body, every atom, every cell in the existence of the human being, as if honoring all the organs, every part of the body one by one. Then the mind bows, and the body bows, and the body fades. And then the mind lifts from it as it bowed to the body, and it begins to see that sometimes there is a new life, and sometimes there is a life that's new. You know, we have branded ourselves like cows with names. I mean, that's too intense. Honestly, guys, when I look at Said Nursi's picture behind the mountain, the picture of the mountain, I could just look at Said Nursi's picture, and it's as if he's like, am I standing in the sky right now? You know? Oh man, the world has many ways to move, you know. Said Nursi says, can you not see the numerous designs made by God as signs, similitudes, or analogies of resurrection? He has placed them in every era, the alteration of day and night, even in the coming and going of clouds. Said Nursi says a thing's innate disposition does not lie. A thing's innate disposition does not lie. That means if the person stops trying to be something, maybe they will realize what they are. You know, because seeing your true nature doesn't mean it's going to be good. It just has to do with the way you walked in this world. If you walked arrogantly, if you disturbed the realm, that will echo. And hopefully it will instantly be sufficed. That means sometimes I think when a moment has a lot of pain, that's like a lot of karma being again, a lot of like from a yoga, you can say from a mystical standpoint, like I mean, from a multidimensional framework, it's as if like there wasn't only like karma, the good and bad was imposed on it. What it was that there was a movement, and if the person's, it just echoed back, you know. It's like cause and effect for the mind, but the mind is doing it through behavior. So if you do something bad, it's if something bad will happen. Why? Because you've allowed that experience to become real for the nature of your mind. So your mind's going to be like, what do I do with considering this experience real? And it has to express it. You know, there's a lot of people who, of course, are very mindful and they don't get angry. But there is something different about silencing your mind and then communicating with your mind. Now, it's no longer just sit in a corner and think as if the world doesn't need you. For every design has its place. That it is design that is locality. You know, that means they taught me what the atom was, but I remember seeing geometrical shapes on a chalkboard. That what the world is like we have to create it, and that was the romanticism. That was the phase of romanticism in history, where they noticed an inevitable void, but they found a way to live as if the dream never could die, you know. Something it took me a while, honestly, took me a while to get this, was that it's okay to have the value of self change elevations. That means sometimes it's as if I've noticed there was in certain confrontations, in certain, like, you know, let's say I'm arguing with someone over something. After some point, I notice how much that person is willing to see, and if they're not, it's because it just stops. That means when you don't fear silence, you don't fear language. When you don't fear language, most likely you're seeing something beyond language. If you're seeing something beyond language, technically, why do you need to talk about it? Only to remodel the civilization and just push the civilization in an advanced direction, then the civilization could do whatever it likes. You know? You know, guys, I'm going to actually go into a quote tunnel of Immanuel Kant. Okay, guys, so the picture on the left corner, that person looking at Said Nursi is Immanuel Kant. And so I'm just going to go into a quote tunnel of his work as well. He says rules for a bit about Immanuel Kant, actually. He was a German philosopher and one of the central Enlightenment thinkers. There we go. Kant's comprehensive and systematic works in epistemology, metaphysics, ethics, and aesthetics have made him one of the most influential figures in the history of Western philosophy. So Immanuel Kant, he says rules for happiness, something to do, someone to love, something to hope for. Immanuel Kant says if you punish a child for being naughty and reward him for being good, he will do right merely for the sake of the reward. And when he goes out into the world and finds that goodness is not always rewarded, nor wickedness always punished, he will grow into a man who only thinks about how he may get on in the world and does right or wrong according as he finds advantage to himself. Here's the levels. I would say first there's like existing, just existing. Then there's living. Then I would say it's living for life. Because for how long can an individual just extract joy from individualism? It's ever changing. Immanuel Kant says we're not rich by what we possess, but by what we can do without. Immanuel Kant says you only know me as you see me, not as I actually am. I could see Immanuel Kant with the intensity of a hip-hop artist shouting that out. Immanuel Kant says three things tell a man. His eyes, his friends. Oh, three things tell a man. That means three things tell who someone is. His eyes, his friends, and his favorite quotes. I think this is a fake. This could be a fake quote. And his favorite quotes. I mean, right there, nobody knows who their favorite quote can change. You know, that means you can't tell a man because it changes. Immanuel Kant says if justice perishes, human life on earth has lost its meaning. Yeah, that's the thing. That's like cutting the head of the snake, but from our side. That means if there was a force who wanted to um, go against humanity, the first thing it would do is make human beings be okay with being dishonored by themselves. That means a civilization that descends to dishonor, it's a very intense thing. Just like a boat with a hole in it, it's like an evolutionary movement of humanity. The violence in the civilization is like a hole in the ship of a descension back into the cave. It took us a while to get out of the cave. It took us a while to be civilized, you know? Immanuel Kant. But a lie is a lie, and in itself intrinsically evil, whether it be told with good or bad intents. He says, you only know me as you see me, not as I actually am. Then he says, but a lie is a lie. So if we can't see the real Kant, how can we lie to him? You know, this is, we found the Immanuel Kant paradox here, guys. It's a unique one. No, I shouldn't be comparing these quotes. I should see his quotes each in their own room, to be honest. I think what he's saying there is that if the person lies, they're hiding. If you're hiding something, then it's questionable. Why are you hiding? Like, what is there to hide in a temporary world? Really, what is there to hide? What can you hide? Immanuel Kant says patience is the strength of the weak. Impatience is the weakness of the strong. Immanuel Kant says enlightenment is man's leaving his self-caused immaturity. Immaturity is the incapacity to use one's intelligence without the guidance of another. Let me read that again. Enlightenment is man's leaving his self-caused immaturity. Immaturity is the incapacity to use one's intelligence without the guidance of another. Such immaturity is self-caused if it is not caused by a lack of intelligence, but by lack of determination and courage to use one's intelligence without being guided by another. Sapere ode. Have the courage to use your own intelligence is therefore the motto of the Enlightenment. Yeah, pretty much your eyes are like a flashlight or again a candle in a dark cosmos, and you got to move around and eventually figure things out. You know, it's like once you win a lot, it's like there's the you first like win the individual's battle. Once you have tasted individual victory, that means you're content with your individualism. Then the collective becomes fascinating to you. But if you haven't experienced your individualism, then the collective becomes an unnecessary burden. Immanuel Kant says, always recognize that human individuals are ends and do not use them as means to your end. Yeah, everybody's going up the mountain in their own way. Immanuel Kant says, do the right thing because it is right. Immanuel Kant says, two things fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration and awe. The oftener and more steadily we reflect on them, the starry heavens above me and the moral law within me. Oh, okay. And increasing admiration, awe, the oftener and more steadily we reflect on them. So the more, yeah, he's saying the starry heavens and the moral law within me. There we go, epic quote. As if like he just can't say in or wrong. Because somebody had to come and say. Guys, if the picture of Immanuel Kant could speak, it'd probably be like, is my shoulder being this mountain right now? Immanuel Kant says, religion is too important a matter to its devotees to be a subject of ridicule. If they indulge in absurdities, they are to be pitied rather than ridiculed. Immanuel Kant says we can judge the heart of a man by his treatment of animals. Immanuel Kant says that means a lot of domestic violence. They should get a pet and see what kind of like, you know, sometimes you get a pet and you realize like your spouse is an animal. Oh my God. Immanuel Kant says science is organized knowledge, wisdom is organized life. Oh my God, Immanuel Kant is like, I think we should all welcome him as, you know, we've already made extraterrestrial contact, guys. I think with philosophers are aliens to me. Oh man, alright. Most men use their knowledge only under guidance from others because they lack the courage to think independently using their own reasoning abilities. It takes intellectual daring to discover the truth. Immanuel Kant says the only thing permanent is change. Immanuel Kant says give a man everything he wants, and at that moment everything is not everything. Wow. I'm happy I caught that, guys. Immanuel Kant is roaring universal law here. He says, give a man everything he wants, and at that moment, everything is not everything. Because the moment the adventure is over, the mind has to do something with that energy. So there's some people who they get a victory, then they celebrate. Then there are generals who don't have time to celebrate. Because all the smaller victories are like mini battles, and the journey is the last, how intense till the last moment the breath ran. Towards how advanced civilization could be. I mean, how else do we encourage this idea that we're on a rock in the middle of nowhere and the most divine thing we can do is to actually build how advanced we can be. We have to find a way to guide the future generations through the digital kingdoms, through the natural kingdoms and the linguistic kingdoms. The way we use language now will suggest the game the future generations want to play. Where the attention of 8 billion people is now is going to suggest where the future generations is going to, what their counterculture is going to be. You know? Immanuel Kant says, experience without theory is blind, but theory without experience is mere intellectual play. Exactly. And it's only when you have the experience you can see something have multiple directions, you know? That means experience is so key. Sometimes I think it's just more profound than any meditation or prayer. Somebody once said prayer is speaking to the universe, to the cosmos. A meditation is listening to it. I will tell you, more important than that is realizing there has never existed a creature like you, so have the reverence of the novel, you know? That means the world is not just the past, for the past lived for the future it could not see. That means we should not live for the selves we see now. We should live for the self we don't see, which is the future generations. The only task now is to plant trees, and where its shadows never belong to our eyes. You know, there's so many things that for me it was like, you know what it was? It was like the evolution of the archetype of the superhero. That means it's like, in Buddha also said something where they asked Buddha, is there gonna be another Buddha? And in his story, there's different angles, of course, to what Buddha has said about this. But Buddha said no, and the guy's like, why, Buddha? And Buddha said, because Buddhism would have spread to such a degree that there would be no need for it. Do you see, Lang? We're not here to just live forever in a shape. You are shapelessly traveling through every shape that has become a memory for you. It is never too late to become reasonable and wise, said Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant says all perception is colored by emotion. You know what that means? That means emotion is the brush of perception. How you feel suggests how the karma of the sensory, how the sensory perception is processed. You know? You know, it's like sometimes you can feel like a badass, but you still have to get off that uncomfortable chair, you know? Immanuel Kant says the question is not so much whether there's life on Mars as whether it will continue to be possible to live on Earth. Wow. Yeah. If we can't handle, if we can't, party properly on Earth, we can't even imagine partying on Mars. Can you imagine the first human beings who actually party on Mars? Immanuel Kant says the wise man can change his mind, the stubborn one never. Wow. Yeah. Ideology can be a box over your head. It's your choice if you like boxes on your head, I'm telling you, this universe has there's nothing that that suggests that the universe has to respond to the inner realms. Sometimes it's like when you don't have an expectation, people might be like, oh, yo, you're not planning for the afterlife. And you're like, what? Afterlife. Life is here. What's after is something else. You see, that means it's like, why do you care for what's after if you haven't seen what's here? Why do we care to be angels in the eyes of God when we haven't realized that we have to change? We have to be like firemen and fix this burning civilization. It's not burning physically, of course. The civilization, the earth has been here longer than us, as the wise George Carlin has said. You know, the earth doesn't care about, trash. It's man who didn't realize the value of the earth. You know, that's the thing. You know, I think sometimes it's a strange revenge, maybe. Maybe because we feel we were pushed and separated from the earth, we want to separate ourselves from the earth, and subconsciously we have stopped caring for the world we're in. It's all a dance of forms. And the personality, when it can find the mirror of existence and bow to its presence, let me tell you, you will laugh in a way as if you never existed. That is the blessing of mysticism. You find eyes that could never close. Immanuel Kant says morality is not properly the doctrine of how we may make ourselves happy, but how we may make ourselves worthy of happiness. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. He's literally, I was seeing it in one dimension. He's added a perpendicular dimension. Because happiness and evolution in regards to actual stuff, it's like, we could all be happy, but we could be an incredibly unadvanced civilization. So that means if somebody came and said, Mr. Within, would you say that we need to get rid of the illusion to build an advanced civilization? The mass hallucination that we think just because sounds move in the void, we are people? As far as I'm concerned, we are the unknown knowing itself for a little while. Before fear was born, time had no idea. Immanuel Kant says, the greatest human quest is to know what one must do in order to become a human being. Wow. Guys, I can't stop reading these Kant quotes. It's epic. This man's eyes saw beyond his feet. Some people only see their feet on the earth. Some people realize the world is in their mind. That's where dreams really are born. Not the samsara dreams, but but the dream of awakening, which is strangely no longer wanting to dream. That means it's as if, like, especially I think every person's going to be like this, where when you get older, you're like, you want to know what's actually going on before your eyes, before the breath departs, before the attention departs through the breath. It's like one of those situations where it's like you're alive now. What if this was heaven and you didn't realize the earth is in the heavens? And guys, just to stay true to what I had said earlier, I'm going to go into a quote tunnel of Ludwig Wittgenstein, talk for a little bit, and actually end the talk quite. Okay, I'm going to read just two quotes from Ludwig Wittgenstein, guys, and I realize I have to actually speak to someone. Ludwig Wittgenstein says, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. Ludwig Wittgenstein says, when we can't think for ourselves, we can always quote. Ludwig Wittgenstein says, nothing is so difficult as not deceiving oneself. Wittgenstein says, if we spoke a different language, we would perceive a somewhat different world. Wittgenstein says, all I know is what I have words for. Wittgenstein says, I don't know why we're here, but I'm pretty sure that it's not in order to enjoy us. Wittgenstein says, to convince someone of the truth, it is not enough to state it, but rather one must find the path from error to truth. Well said. That's exactly it. When you start from the bottom and you go top, you have confidence in the journey. But if you suddenly are in the middle of a mountain and you try to go to the top, you don't know how far you can fall. Wittgenstein says, is my understanding only blindness to my own lack of understanding it? It often seems so to me. Yeah, the unknown dimension of self. Language. Wittgenstein says language disguises thought. Wittgenstein says think. Guys, Wittgenstein says language disguises thought. I remember one night writing, language is the skin of the ego. Honestly, I think if Wittgenstein heard that, he'd be like, you've done good, man. You've done Wittgenstein says, think of the tools in a toolbox. There's a hammer, pliers, a saw, a screwdriver, a rule, a glue pot, nails and screws. The function of words are as diverse as the functions of these objects. Wittgenstein, see, again, point to the inner realms. Wittgenstein says, one of the most misleading representational techniques in our language is the use of the word I. Wittgenstein says, if people did not sometimes do silly things, nothing intelligent would ever get done. Wittgenstein says the real question of life after death isn't whether or not it exists, but even if it does, what problem this really solves. Wittgenstein says we learn by rearranging what we know. Wittgenstein says a man will be imprisoned in a room with a door that's unlocked and opens inwards, as long as it does not occur to him to pull rather than push it. Wittgenstein says only a man who lives not in time but in the present is happy. Wittgenstein says what is thinkable is also possible. Wittgenstein says only describe, don't explain. Wittgenstein says the classifications made by philosophers and psychologists are like trying to classify clouds by their shape. For an answer which cannot be expressed, the question too cannot be expressed. The riddle does not exist. If a question cannot be put at all, then it can also be answered. And Wittgenstein says he who lives in the present lives in eternity. So anyways, guys, I kind of sped through that, but pretty much my effort in this talk is pretty much, if the notion of God is not an idea, we notice that it's like a field-like presence where the mind was never a body to itself, you know? It could be a new phase in human reality where it's as if when Friedrich Nietzsche said God is dead, after the idea of God stripped away, now the human being is still evolving, and that archetypal space has yet to be filled, has yet to be fulfilled. So I can tell you that cyberspace is most likely going to fill that gap unless there's some revolutionary shift in language. Because if our language changes, do you know what that would mean? That would mean we would be free before we would not be. We would be able to be explorers before we were looking for facts, because facts are acts that have stopped. They're snapshots in a realm that was like a film. And anyways, thanks for listening, everyone. I hope this talk was helpful. Much blessings and namaste. And there's most likely going to be part 2 to this, or like a second version. Thanks. Blessings.